Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining in today's webinar for Interviewing 101. This is the first webinar that we're launching in our professional development series for the Student Event Planners Association. We have a phenomenal presenter here today, Mr. Robert Holland with the Interview Wiz, and we are going to get started at 5 after. Please note, guys, if you're joining the call, you can post any questions or comments that you have on the actual event page on Google. I'll be following along with those questions and keeping Robert informed of any questions that you do ask. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so if you hold questions to the end, you're welcome to do that as well. And thank you guys for coming out today. I'm starting to see some names show up that I recognize, so thank you guys so much for joining the call. And if you're not a part of SEPA and joining the call, kudos to you. We're glad to have you. This would also be a good time, guys, if you want to take the opportunity to maybe write down a couple questions that you might have, and if they are addressed in the actual webinar, then you don't have to ask them, but if not, then you can get them answered at the end as well. Think about some things that maybe challenges that you guys have had, maybe you've got some interviews upcoming, or just skills that you've wanted to know about, or the correct way to answer a particular question, whatever it may be. Go ahead and write down a couple notes. I also recommend getting a pen and paper out. Robert's definitely going to have a lot of valuable information to share, so make sure that you guys are taking some notes. And just to get some camaraderie going, if y'all want to go ahead and post on the wall just so I know it's also working and you can put what chapter you're part of, that would be great. I see Madison with Texas A&M University chapter, Marcus with the Bowling Green State University chapter. Welcome, guys. All right. Thank you, Madison. We'll start, guys, in about 1 minute. Just allow a couple more people to join in. Please note that this will also be recorded and available on our YouTube channel after the call, so if you guys want to go back and reference any information that was shared on today's call, you can. Also recommend sharing it with your fellow members and your leaders of your chapters. I know that there were some people, because it is the first day of school, that were not able to join in today. All right, and with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's call. I am so excited to introduce such a phenomenal speaker and presenter that we have today. His name is Robert Holland, and guys, he has quite the credentials here. So he has over 20 years of experience both doing hiring, managing, as well as recruiting. So he can really give you both perspectives, both sides of the coins as it relates to interviewing. He's got some amazing tips to share. He's also the author of The Truth About Interviewing, which I've been speaking with him briefly about his book, which is phenomenal. It gives information right off the bat, even when you guys open it, so you're not going to have to read several chapters in to start getting information. It's very short, quick, succinct, definitely a great read for the novice level interviewer as well as the mid-level. So I highly recommend that you guys check out his book on Amazon. It's, I think, $8 or less when I checked last night. So definitely a good investment to be made. He's also the founder and owner of Interview Wiz and Career Services LLC. He's based in San Antonio, Texas, but he's done workshops and seminars and webinars as well all over the country. He's a phenomenal individual. He's also guest spoken for different schools, different churches, different organizations, and he's conducted over 6,000 interviews in his day. So he has a lot of wisdom to share with you guys. Couldn't be more excited to have him on the call. Definitely an honor and a privilege. So with that, Robert, take it away.
All right, thank you so much. That was an awesome introduction. Really appreciate that. Okay, so I'm so glad to have this opportunity. I really want to say a special thanks to Aubrey and also to Jillian, the entire Student Event Planning Association, and the entire SEPA program. I'm just really excited. I'm so glad to have this opportunity. So first and foremost, I just want to really quick just kind of cover what we'll be going over. I'm going to have a agenda pop up here real quick, or rather I'll share my screen. Presentation is very, very simple, very basic, just so that the focus is more so on what I'm communicating rather than any pretty visuals that you will see on the screen. Okay? All right, so with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just to tell you just a little bit very briefly about why I started this business. I was just talking and sharing this with the ladies before we started. The reason I started this business is, you know, essentially many people go out and they interview and they have their best suit on, they're sharp, they're articulate, they have a great resume, and for some reason they're not contacted, you know, for the position. You know, they're often wondering, you know, what happened? Where did I fall short? What happened? And why did it, you know, why didn't I get a call back? And unfortunately, that information is never shared. You know, so I would challenge any of you, if you've ever gone on a job interview in the past, if you've ever gone on a job interview at any point, did they contact you if you were not hired? More than likely, the answer is no. And if you were fortunate enough to be in that 1 percentile that was contacted to tell you essentially that you were not hired, my next question then would be, did they ask you to grab a pen and paper so that you could write down the reasons why you were not selected, or what were the issues that caused them to defer to another candidate and hire someone else? Chances are they didn't, and that's the norm. There's a reason for that. They can't share that information with you for 2 reasons. 1, they're not really trained to provide that feedback, and 2, there are a lot of legalities that go into play, and they have to be very careful with the responses that they give out. So more than likely what individuals will hear is, you know, although your credentials were impressive, we found a better fit, or we found someone that was a more suitable candidate. You know, and the question becomes, what does that mean? What is a better fit? What does that mean? What does it mean that you found a more qualified candidate? You know, I've got all the skill sets, I've got all of the abilities, I've got the education, I've got the background. What does that actually mean? And today we're going to find that out, folks. Okay? So what we're going to do now, I'm just going to share my screen here with you really quick. And let's see. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Okay, so it's Interviewing 101, okay? And we're going to go ahead and get started with some of the common questions. Okay, so one of the questions that I'm asked most often is, Robert, you know, what can I expect when I go for an interview? Well, the #1 question, without a doubt, that you will always come across, regardless of industry, regardless of what portion of the country you're in, what geographic location, what industry, it doesn't matter what you're applying for, you're always going to usually have the question of, tell me about yourself. Now, that sounds like a very simple, non-invasive question. Tell me about yourself. In fact, it's designed to be non-invasive. It's designed to be more of an icebreaker when the interviewer is trying to really connect with you and to basically break the ice a little bit. So when they say, tell me about yourself, what happens is many folks fall into the trap of, well, let's see, I've got 3 children, I've lived in the city of Chicago for the last 25 years. I have purchased my first house at 24. I attended this university. I graduated with a 3.5 GPA, and I'm happily married, and I have a dog, and finally was able to get that RV I wanted. Well, that's great, but guess what? That's not what they're actually looking for. Okay, so that is typically what a lot of people will respond with. They'll respond with very personal things and their personal background, and really what they're looking for is your professional experience. So when they ask the question of, tell me about yourself, they're looking for your professional experience. They want to know exactly what it is that you've done. So an example would be, my name is Robert Holland. I'm a native, San Antonian. I've been here for 34 years, etc. I started out working in broadcast communications. From there, I moved into this position. I'm very excited about this opportunity. In fact, and then you kind of explain some of your background and skill sets. You want to try and keep it under 1 minute. Okay, in fact, we call it the elevator pitch. Okay, it's 60 seconds or less. Ideally, you want to try and keep it somewhere around 30 to 45 seconds. But essentially, that's what they're looking for. They want to know what type of background you have. They want to know who is it that they're actually interviewing. They have an opportunity now to put a personality with the resume. Okay. One of the other questions that you will be asked most often is, what do you know about the company? Okay. Now, obviously, with today's technology, we have tons of resources and tools that we can use to look up information about a company. But what is very impressive, and I know what impressed me often when I was a hiring manager and a recruiter, is when someone could explain to me and tell me information about the company that was not necessarily on the website. Okay, so in other words, they didn't just go over the website and look over to get some of the common points. That's almost expected by the hiring manager. They know that you're going to cover the basic information that's on the website. Try Googling the company. Try seeing if you can find out information in news articles. Look to see if there's any information out there in Bloomberg or, some of the other websites that talk, about different companies and some of the things that are occurring. Now, obviously, you want to make it positive news. You don't want to throw out there that the company is being bought out or their stocks plummeted $33 a share this morning, or you don't want to cover information like that, but you do want to try and cover positive information because hiring managers are often impressed when you can provide information that has not been told to them in the past. They're looking for something fresh. Very important point to remember. As the interviewer, okay, the person, or the interviewee rather, as the person being interviewed, the hiring manager is looking for someone who wows them, a person who's going to absolutely blow them away. This is what they're looking for. They're looking for someone that's going to provide some fresh and innovative insight, someone who's going to provide some fresh ideas and something completely different than what they've faced in the past. So you want that opportunity to blow them away. In fact, in my past, when I was first being trained as a hiring manager years ago, my boss would actually wait 2 or 3 days before she would make a decision on who she was going to hire. And I was making my decision the same day. And I asked her, why are you waiting for that 2 or 3 day period to go by? You're going to be stacked up with going over all of these resumes at the end of the week. And she says, well, if I still remember them by the end of the week, then obviously they have really impressed me. If I can't remember anything about this person, then why would I make the decision to hire them? And that was the feedback that she gave me. But after really sitting back and thinking about it, it made perfect sense. And that's the same mentality that a lot of hiring managers have today. You have to really make sure that you're wowing them, that there's something unique about you and explosive about you, your energy, your greeting. Find a way to connect with your interviewer, okay? Find a way to connect with them. If they're talking and they're saying that, the subject matter comes up that their son plays Little League. If you have a son that's in baseball or kids that are in sports, there's nothing wrong with making a short mention of that. You just don't want to get into a long, full-blown out conversation about something that's not relevant to the job. But there's nothing wrong with connecting with the interviewer. Okay, it's a great opportunity to connect with them because interviewers often, they tend to lean toward people that they like. Believe it or not, it's not always based on your skill sets, your talents and abilities. It's often based on the likability factor, okay? Now, we're going to move on to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about that likability factor again. Okay, so one of the things that was mentioned to me is strengths and weaknesses. This has been a very challenging question to answer for people because they don't want to say the wrong thing. You know, they want to make sure that they're providing the best information, they're putting their best foot forward. You know, I often call this analogy like going on a first date. You know, you really don't want to put the wrong side, you know, forward because then that person may not like what they see. You know, they may not like the presentation. So when it comes to strengths and weaknesses, people are very cautious. And as a hiring manager, they can tell when you are being extra cautious, and that sometimes can raise a red flag because they're wondering, what is this person so nervous about? Okay, so I'm going to cover a few things that you can do to cover your strengths and weaknesses, and I'll give you some examples of things that a hiring manager is actually looking for. Okay, now obviously when it comes to strengths, those are pretty easy for most people. They can probably rattle off the top of their head any strengths that they have, you know, things that they can do fairly well or exceptionally well with little to no effort. You know, so that's very easy for them to cover. Where the challenge comes in, obviously, is for the weaknesses, or what I like to refer to as areas of opportunity. Okay, so for weaknesses or areas of opportunity, the question becomes, how do I answer these? Well, the main thing to remember is that when you're talking about weaknesses or areas of opportunity, you want to present your opportunity or your weakness as an actual strength. Okay, so for example, if you're interviewing, and let's say you're interviewing for an accountant position, and you say, well, I have a habit of being extremely detail-oriented, and in fact, as a result, that tends to slow me down quite a bit because I am very detail-oriented and very focused. So I really need to work on speeding up my pace. Well, although that's an opportunity, and although it's a weakness, it's still a positive because you're detail-oriented and detail-focused, especially considering you're interviewing for an accountant position. So as an accountant, obviously, you would love to have someone who's detail-oriented. So in this case, you're presenting that weakness as an actual positive. Another example, let's say if you were interviewing and you were interviewing for a management role. Okay, you're interviewing for a manager's role. And so one area of opportunity might be, you know, I tend to delegate. I don't delegate as much as I should because I like to follow projects through to completion. I want to make sure that projects are finished and, you know, they're started and finished from A to Z. And I have opportunity to be a better delegator, but I am working on that currently, and I am positive that, you know, I will be able to overcome that, you know, weakness or what have you. That again is providing, you know, a weakness, but in actuality it's a positive. If I were a director or an executive and I were looking to hire a manager and I have someone that I know is going to follow that project through from start to finish, then I would absolutely be happy that this is a person that's going to be on board. So again, that's the main thing to remember, is that you want to present that negative as a positive. Now, I'm going to try and see if I can minimize this screen for a second here. I don't want to miss any questions. If I do, because I no longer can see the screen that has the board or the post, please don't be afraid to interrupt me because I don't want to ignore any questions if there are any out there. Okay, I have a really huge screen here and it looks like it's taken up everything. So
you're doing good.
All right, perfect. Okay, so one of the other questions is, you know, Robert, what is it that I can do to really set myself apart? You know, as you mentioned in the beginning, what is it that I can do to set myself apart? What's the best thing that I can do as a candidate to really put myself in the best position? And it's very, very simple. Preparation. Okay? Preparation, preparation, preparation. Thorough preparation means that you should be relatively comfortable with any aspect of the interview. Okay, it is normal to be nervous during an interview, so please don't think that, oh my goodness, I'm nervous, I'm going to go in there and I'm just going to babble along and I'm going to completely lose my train of thought. Well, one component of nervousness has to do with the fear of the unknown. Okay, so if you're afraid, chances are you're just afraid because you're not quite sure what they're going to ask. You're not quite sure how the interview is going to go. The more research you do, the more preparation you do, the more you're going to combat that nervousness. Okay, and I do have a great exercise that I'm going to recommend to you guys that you can do if you are a person who suffers from a lot of anxiety or a lot of nervousness. I've seen some of the most confident individuals interview and they're still exceptionally nervous, and as a result they have a really difficult time getting through the interview. They know exactly what they want to say, they know their background, their experience, but they can't seem to get through it because they're fumbling along over the words because that nervousness has really taken a hold to them. Okay, so preparation is going to be the key, folks. Now, obviously, when you prepare, you want to make sure that you're doing as much research as possible on the company. Okay, research everything you can about the organization. Find out what products they carry, what services do they offer. You know, are they a fairly new company? When did they start? You know, are they do they have affiliates? You know, is this one company or do they have multiple locations? You know, these are things that you really want to try and find out about the company itself. In addition to that, you want to make sure as well that you get all of the information on who's going to interview you. You'd be surprised. Some folks are so happy to get that call for the interview and they completely forget to write down the person that they're actually supposed to interview with. And then once they arrive at that location, they're totally stumped and they can't think of who they're supposed to interview with. And you don't want to count on the receptionist or the security person having that information and knowing. I've seen this happen, folks. I've actually seen where folks have come out, they're excited for the interview, they have no idea who they're supposed to interview with, and that information was not provided to the receptionist, and as a result, that person missed out on the interview. These type of things can happen. So again, make sure you get that information. Try to find out, if at all possible, okay, what type of interview this is going to be. Usually a good recruiter will cover a lot of information. They'll tell you, you know, this is going to be an interview, it's going to be on Tuesday at 9 a.m. Please make sure you're here on time. Or they may provide you with details such as, you know, park on the upper level, make sure you get your ticket validated before you leave, etc. But there are also are different types of interviews, which we'll talk a little bit about. And those different types of interviews are what you really want to know as well, because if you're going to be in a, for example, in a panel interview, where you're going to be in a group setting amongst other individuals, your peers, people who are going to be competing with you for the same types of positions, you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. Okay? If you're going to go to a video conference interview, maybe you're having an interview right from the comfort of your own home. Many folks have never had a video conference interview, and so they're very nervous. They don't know how to conduct themselves on a video, or they're not quite sure, you know, what they should or shouldn't say, or what their posture or body language should be. You know, they sometimes can be a little too relaxed and not realize that this is not coming across the way it should to the interviewer. So there's a lot of things that you need to make sure you find out also about the type of interview. Okay, dry run. Now I have that on the screen, folks, because the most important thing when it comes to going on an interview is a dry run. You want to know as much information as possible, and if you have an interview that's set for a future date, let's say if it's Tuesday and the interview was on Thursday, try to do a dry run. You know, drive there, find out if you're going to run into traffic, is there construction, you know, is the exit that you need to take closed and there's a detour. You know, these are things that you want to be aware of, because you'd be surprised just trying to go the same day at the spur of the moment, and all of a sudden you're on a detour and GPS is going crazy and now you have no idea how to get where you need to go, and that can cause you to be late. Okay, and so doing a dry run is extremely important. In addition to that, there may be security checkpoints. Okay, there may be a security desk, or you know, there may be a station there in which you have to sign in. You may have to go through 1 or 2 different checkpoints, and that can be time consuming. The key here is that you always want to arrive at least 15 minutes early to an interview. Okay, I would say 20 minutes max. That is the earliest that you would want to arrive at an interview. Now, I'm going to tell you something rather surprising here, and we were actually just talking about this before the presentation. You do not want to arrive for an interview an hour ahead of time, or even 45 minutes ahead of time. Because what can happen is, if you're arriving at an interview that early, that hiring manager probably has a tight schedule. They're probably interviewing other candidates. They probably have meetings that are scheduled for the day. They could have performance issues that they have to address, and maybe it's the last day to do so before a person goes on vacation. There's all sorts of things that are taking place with that hiring manager. And if you're showing up that early, then you can sort of throw off their day a little bit, because they're going to feel compelled and obligated to meet with you since you're sitting out in the lobby and you're waiting for that long. Okay? So at that point, when they do call you back, chances are they're not really focused on the interview. They're thinking about what they have to do and the fact that their schedule now is a little off kilt. So, you know, they may not necessarily be focusing on you, which is what you want. And so, again, that's the reason why you don't want to show up too early. Okay? Resume review. Okay, when it comes to resume review, you should absolutely be an expert on you. Oftentimes I've been asked, what is the #1 reason why individuals do not get the job, or why they're not offered the position? Believe it or not, the #1 reason is not because they could not answer the interview questions. It's not because they weren't appropriately dressed. It's because they were not able to articulate their own background and experience. In other words, they couldn't tell anything about themselves. As a candidate, you are a product that you are trying to sell to the interviewer. If you were on a shelf and there's other products exactly like you, why, as a customer, would I want to purchase you? That's the main thing you want to keep in mind. What makes you different? What sets you apart? Okay? So you want to make sure you are an expert on your own background and experience. Now, very important point here. When you review your resume, make sure that you understand your resume forward to backwards, backwards forwards. You want to make sure you understand it from both angles. Many times what happens is folks rehearse their resumes and they start at the top and work their way down. Well, not every interviewer or hiring manager is going to start out that way. Some of them may start from the bottom up and say, hey, tell me about this last position. Tell me about this very first position that you had. And if you're, programmed to follow from top to bottom, you may lose your footing and stumble during that interview. So you want to make sure you understand your resume from both ends. Okay, that's something, believe it or not, that happens quite often. Never review your resume in the waiting area. Okay, if you're in a lobby, or if you're sitting and you're waiting on the person to come and pick you up for the interview, please, please, please do not review and rehearse your resume in the lobby or the waiting area. Doing so tells the hiring manager that you're not versed in your own background. That's not the place to really cover that information. You should know this before you leave the house. Okay? This is something you should know before you actually leave the house. So again, reviewing the resume, it's fine if you're doing it at home. You want to make sure you have at least 5 copies of your resume, because you never know, at some point you could arrive for the interview and they can tell you, oh, we misplaced your resume. Do you have another copy? So you want to make sure you have a copy. In addition to that, if they really like you, oftentimes what will happen is they'll have you to interview with another manager or a peer or someone else in the organization. And you want to make sure you have enough resumes for both of those folks or anyone else that you come in contact with. So always have at least 5 copies, a minimum of 5 copies. In fact, there is no such thing as having too many resumes. Okay, so you want to make sure your resumes are tucked in a nice folder. You want to make sure that they're neat, no creases on the ends. You don't want to have the coffee stain or the kid spilt the chocolate milk over it. You want to make sure that your resume is perfect. Okay? Another point on here is ask for the job. Sounds very simple. And most individuals, how do I ask for the job? Well, when you interview, once the interview is over, once the interview is complete, what are the next steps? Do you just walk away at that point, shake hands, and say, have a great day? No, you want to sell yourself. You want to let them know, wow, I'm really excited about this opportunity. I am very excited about this opportunity, and I think that it sounds like this will be a great fit for me. You know, and then you ask them, what are the next steps from here? There is nothing wrong with asking about the next steps, okay? So you want to ask what the next steps are because it does two things. One, it tells the interviewer that you are very serious about this opportunity, and B, it lets you know exactly where you need to be and what the next steps are, so you know where you are in the process. You know, if they say the next step is you're going to have a second interview, or the next step is going to be an online assessment test that you have to take, at least at this point you know what the next steps are and what to expect. Okay, so that's going to be very important to know. Alrighty, one of the other questions that was presented to me was, you know, what happens if I get a job offer on the spot? I mean, what happens if I get this perfect scenario, this perfect situation, and they offer me an opportunity on the spot? How do I go about that? Can I tell them, can I think about it? And the answer to that is absolutely not. You never, ever want to tell a hiring manager, can I think about it? Let me explain to you why. A recruiter and a hiring manager are working in conjunction with one another. The recruiter's job is to try and find the best candidates for this particular position. This hiring manager more than likely has either had to jump in and fill in if they're short-staffed, or they have other members of the team that may be working overtime. Everyone's carrying extra load while they try and fill this particular position or more positions. And as a result, everyone is anticipating that, you know, we'll get this position filled very soon. So this hiring manager has finally had a chance to interview you. They are extremely excited. They can't wait to make you an offer, and you tell them, can I think about it? You have just completely let the wind out of the sail. So you want to make sure that you accept that position, and I'll tell you why. When you say to them, can I think about it, you give them the depiction, you give them the indication, rather, that you are not wholeheartedly interested in this position. Even if it's an issue of salary or pay or compensation or benefits, the thing is, they're going to think instantly that the first opportunity you get to make $1 more an hour, you're going to leave the company. And so at that point, they're not really vested any longer in you as a candidate. So you never want to tell them, can I think about it? Okay? Always accept the offer. You can always counter. You can always counter once they call back, or once you have that second phone call. You can always counter. And actually, I can go over that for anyone that's interested. I have a book that I'm working on currently about salary negotiations, and that's part of it. Okay? So you never want to say that. Again, always accept the offer, and you can work out the details after. It's a lot easier to work out the details after the fact than saying, can I think about it from the beginning? Okay, what if I do not like the environment? So let's say you go on an interview and you're not very happy with the environment, or maybe there's something about this job or this role that is not appealing, and you just say to yourself, I cannot see myself working here. Always go through, remain professional, and always continue the interview from start to finish. Okay? Never stop or interrupt an interview. Never stop and decide, you know, this place really just appalls me. It smells like a damp basement, or I'm really not happy with what I'm seeing, so I would just, you know, rather leave at this point. Always go through the interview entirely. Very true story, folks, and I'll tell you this really quick. I had a candidate once that came in, interviewed, and we were actually working at a remote site because they were actually doing something with the windows, and there was plastic up and all sorts of things. And at this particular time, I was in Chicago, and so it was brutally cold outside. We had a candidate come in, and she stood up during the middle of the interview and said, it's just way too cold in here. I can't see myself working here. Now, this person had no idea that this was not going to be the location that she was working at. But she stood up in the midst, and even when I stopped to try and explain, well, you know, listen, just so that you know, she said, no, that's okay, thank you, and she walked out. She literally walked out on that opportunity because she was actually a great candidate. So again, there's little things that you may not be aware of. So always go through with the entire interview. You just never know exactly what's there or what type of reasons are behind whatever's occurring at that particular moment. Give the interviewer an opportunity to kind of explain things. Just because you're interviewing at one location does not mean that that's where you're going to be located or that's where you're going to be working. You could be in an entirely different office. Okay, so always maintain that. Okay. Now, something else I wanted to cover really quick that's not actually listed on here, and I just thought about this, and this is very important. One major question that I've had in the past is, when does the interview start? When does the interview start? Some folks are wondering, does the interview start when I'm in the office and I'm interviewing with that particular hiring manager? Does the interview start when I'm sitting in the lobby and I'm waiting for them to call me? When does the interview actually start? That's the main question. Well, to answer that, the interview starts the moment you leave the house. The interview starts the moment that you leave the house. When you leave, you have no idea who you're encountering. You don't know who you're coming across on the expressway. If you are driving into the parking lot of the building, you could actually be parking next to the vice president of that organization. You always want to be cognizant once you leave the house and conduct yourself professionally from the moment you leave the house on. Okay? I've seen incidents where individuals did some things to really shoot themselves in the foot and ruin an opportunity because they were still getting dressed in the parking lot, or they were talking on a cell phone and some of the conversation wasn't very professional, and they thought just because they're in the parking lot and they're not sitting in the office interviewing that it was okay. So again, there's a lot of little things, and I give a lot more insight and stories in my book, but you always want to be cognizant of your conversation and what you're saying. Okay? All right. Are there any questions? I know that there's going to be a lot of questions. I'm hoping there's a lot of questions so that I can answer these accordingly. And if you have questions, if you are comfortable enough to ask them, please feel free to. My contact information is listed on the screen. My email address is listed at the top, which is rholland@interviewwiz.com. If you do have questions and you think of something even after today, maybe it's tomorrow or something pops up, the day after, please feel free to email me. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. My contact number is there as well, 800-774-4971. My extension is 101. And again, this is my website address, is which I don't have on here, unfortunately, is interviewwiz.com. Okay, so if you have questions or concerns, and you think of something later, maybe you forgot now, please feel free to throw it out there. I'll be happy to answer it for you.
Hey, Robert, I don't know that we're able to see that slide. Could you, maybe you might be sharing a particular way that we're not able to see it, so perfect. Oh my gosh, I took so many notes. This was absolutely phenomenal. I'm going to be reading the wall and kind of communicating some of the questions. One question that I know we'll have is, let's say you do go into an interview and you may be interviewing with multiple companies at the same time. What if you do have a pending job opportunity that perhaps you might prefer to the company that you happen to be doing the interview with, and they make an offer to you? How do you respond to that situation? You mentioned never saying I'll think about it or can I get back to you. What would you do in that instance?
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, you're interviewing with one company but you have an offer on the table?
So you may be interviewing, maybe let's say I've interviewed with two companies a couple days ago, and I'm waiting on communication back from them of whether or not I got the job, and I'm in an interview right now with another company and they offer me a job on the spot. If I really would prefer to actually go with those other companies, but I'm not certain that they're gonna, I feel good about the interview I had a couple days ago, but I'm not certain if they're gonna give me a job offer. What do you recommend that students do in that circumstance?
Sure, great question. That is a great question. I would recommend that you still go through with the interview. You still do not want to tell them you'll think about it. You go through with the interview wholeheartedly, okay? And if they decide that they're going to offer you a job on the spot, every company is going to have a start date. And with that start date is usually when there's going to be a training class or there's going to be some type of training set up. So usually you have a few days, you have a couple of days to think about it, even though you're not necessarily communicating that with them. You just always want to make sure you accept it, because behind the scenes, it's really more so the professional thing to do. Believe it or not, working with hiring managers and recruiters, I have not come across many at all that have said, well, why didn't this person just tell me that they didn't want the job? Usually they're busy trying to figure out what they can do to counter. Okay, so if they ask you, hey, what happened, and you're honest with them and you let them know that, hey, I had another opportunity that came about, and this is a great opportunity for me, or it's something I think would be a better fit. It's no different than when you as the candidate receive that call, or once you've communicated with them saying that they found a better fit. You found a better fit as well. And as a candidate, you are interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. So even if you are not the person obviously conducting the interview, you're a candidate, you should also be looking to make sure that, this is somewhere that you really want to work. And if you have something else that you're more interested in, but you're offered another job in the interim, always accept the offer. Again, you can always respond back the next day. The professional thing to do would be to try and have something in writing. You don't want to write a novel, because I'll be honest with you, the longer the letter, the less likely they are to believe you. You want to keep things very short and sweet, and just let them know that you can contact them and let them know that you found a better offer, or that you found another opportunity that is more closely aligned with your background and your education or what have you. And again, you're not really burning yourself. You're not burning a bridge, believe it or not. They'd much rather you do that than tell them that you'll think about it, because from that moment on, they're going to be very shaky. Even if they were to hire you, they're going to be shaky with whether or not you're going to stay or not. I hope I answered that question for you.
Absolutely. We've got some great questions also coming through. Julian asked, is it acceptable to ask how many other candidates there are?
That's a really good question, and I'll be honest with you. I would not ask that question, and the reason for that is depending on the hiring manager. Some hiring managers will look at that as almost like a slight lack of confidence. Because if you're wondering how many other candidates there are, then chances are you're wondering how you basically fared compared to them. How did I do compared to the other 5 or 6 or what have you? Sometimes the hiring manager may tell you, okay, well, we're at the end of our interviews for this week, or we've all, you were the last interview, or they may say, you're just the second person that we've interviewed. We have more people for the rest of the week. That's not a question that I would recommend asking unless you are interviewing with a staffing agency. Now, if you're interviewing with the company directly, that is not a question you would want to ask, because again, it gives sort of an indication that there's a slight lack of confidence. But if you're interviewing with a staffing agency, maybe it's a temp to perm position, or maybe it's a contract role, that is a question that you can absolutely ask the staffing agency.
Perfect. I'm going to kind of do this as a multi-question, and it's based off of Madison's question. What are the best post-interview practices? And more specifically, her question is, how long after the interview should I send a thank you note? Is it better to send an email or a handwritten note?
Oh, boy, I love that question. It is always better to send a handwritten note, because a handwritten note says that you've taken the time out to be personable. Hiring managers are accustomed to receiving emails, and the key is that you want to send it. You want to try and make sure that that gets sent the same day. If you wait 2 or 3 days, again, that person could get busy. If the interview didn't go so well, they may not even remember you. So you always want to try and collect on that opportunity the same day. There are cases in which if the decision is hanging in the balance and they're trying to really determine who they're going to go with, that thank you note can make the difference. It shows that this person is personable. They're really serious about this opportunity. They took the time out to write a personal thank you letter. Always ask for a business card, or if you don't have a business, or if they don't have a business card, try to get their contact information. But again, a thank you note is always going to be better. It's always going to trump an email every time.
Perfect. At the end of most interviews, typically the interviewer would ask the question, do you have any questions? Is it appropriate to respond with questions? Would you suggest that they respond with questions? And if so, what questions would you say are the best to ask that would really help to, you had mentioned one specifically, but that would really help to position the interviewee in a better light?
Okay, sure, absolutely. To answer your first question, yes, you always want to have questions to ask the interviewer. If you do not have questions, that can give them the indication that you're not really interested in this opportunity. So you do want to make sure you have questions. My suggestion is you always want to have at least 4 to 5 questions. Now, you're not going to ask all 4 to 5, but you want to make sure you have at least 4 to 5 questions written down. If the interviewer is very long-winded, if it's been an hour and they're still interviewing and they're finally wrapping things up, you probably don't want to ask 5 questions, because at that point it's going to put them over their allotted time frame probably to interview. So you want to keep your questions short at that point. And I would try to limit it to 2 to 3 questions. If your interviewer is not long-winded and you feel comfortable that they're going to answer your questions relatively quickly, then I would say it's fair to have at least 3 to 4 questions at that point. There is a such thing as overkill when you have post-interview questions. If you're asking 7 or 8 questions, all of a sudden now the tables have turned and it goes from being interested to being concerned. Now at this point they're going to say, wow, this person has a lot of questions. I wonder if this is, the right opportunity for them. So you want to always keep your questions basic. As far as the type of questions, one good question that I would say you always want to ask, and this is kind of a secret that is known among many hiring managers, but I'm going to share this with you today. When you're in an interview and you want to ask a post-interview question, always ask the hiring manager, especially if they appear to be enjoying their position or somewhat happy in their role. Always ask them, what has attributed to your success here within the organization? That's one question I would definitely ask. Or in addition to that, what attributes do you feel, that you've executed here that has attributed to your success? One secret is that hiring managers love to talk about themselves. They love to flex their muscle. They love to kind of tell about their background and experience in the company and the organization if they've moved up through the ranks. And what you're doing is you're giving them that opportunity to kind of express that. And so you are showing at that point that you are A, interested, B, that you're very coachable, and you're giving them enough room to feel as though they can mold you into the type of employee that they're looking for.
Excellent. So one of the most intimidating moments that I ever had in an interview was at the end of the interview when they offered me the job, and more specifically, they asked me what I would like my starting salary to be. And definitely I know that that was a test. So how can people be prepared for an interview, know going in what they want to ask for, what the market would allow, and also keeping in mind our demographic of students. Sometimes they have abnormal expectations since they have a piece of paper with them now of what they can ask. What are your best practices for that? How do you talk about money comfortably?
Great question. I would say if you are a person that has, your entry level, in other words, you're breaking into this industry for the first time and you have very little or no experience, then what you want to do is try and ask for fair market value for an entry-level role. Because there's a lot more competition at your level, believe it or not, than there would be for someone that's more seasoned and has a lot more experience. They probably are in a little bit better position to negotiate as far as salary. So what I would recommend is utilize your resources. Glassdoor is an excellent resource with respect to salary. Salary.com or some of the other websites that give sort of an indication as to what the market value is for certain positions. And what you want to do is you want to try and align yourself somewhere with that entry-level salary. I would not, let's say if the minimum is 40,000, I wouldn't go over 42 or 43,000. I would probably stay somewhere within that $2,000 or $3,000 range over the market value. If you go higher, then at that point you are risking them passing you over to basically find someone else that they can offer that lower salary to. Now, if you are a person who's got more experience and you're seasoned, then at that point I would always ask for the market value. So if your market value is 80,000, for example, there's nothing wrong with asking for 84, 85. One big secret, and I'm sort of spilling my next book a little bit here, but one major secret is, when hiring managers hire an individual that they really like, someone that they feel is going to really make an immediate impact, or someone that they feel can really perform in this role, they already have this cushion built in case that person has a counter offer, or in case they say they're not happy with the salary. And usually it's going to be somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000. So usually what you're going to hear is, well, if you feel as though that your market value is this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and go to HR. I'm going to go to bat for you, and I'm going to see what I can do to try and get you a little bit more money. Well, here's the thing. That money is already built in. They've already built in that $2,000 or $3,000 cushion and anticipated in case they do come across someone that they feel is a great fit. And so when they come back to you, they're going to say, well, I went to bat, and here's what I was able to do. I was able to get you that extra $3,000, or I was able to get you that extra $2,000. 9 out of 10, they never even went to HR. I mean, this is something that they do. And so that is one of the, I hate to use the word tactic, but it's sort of a strategy that's used often. So that would be my recommendation. Again, if you're entry level, you want to try and stay right about market value, no more than $2,000 or $3,000 over. If you're a seasoned professional, ask for what you are worth. You don't want to, put yourself 25% over whatever your true market value is. But you do want to try and ask for what you are worth, because again, if they're very interested in you, most oftentimes they will try to find a way to make that happen.
Great answer. And we're going to try and wrap up real quick. I do have just a few more questions. Kim asked a great question. If the interviewer says they'll call you after a certain amount of days, how many days do you think you should wait before you call the company to ask them about your application or what the status is after the interview?
Well, if the interviewer tells you that they're going to call you after a certain amount of days, let's say, for example, let's just use, let's say 5 days. If they tell you that they're going to call you after 5 days, what I would do is I would wait that 5 days, only because oftentimes they can get very busy, or you just never know where they are in the interview process. You could be at the very beginning of the pool of candidates, and so they have to get through the remainder of those candidates before they can actually start to make a decision. So I would give it that time frame, that they're telling you, and then that very next day I would call and follow up. If the interviewer tells you, hey, give me 3 days and I'll call, I'll give you a call after that, then I would say, even if you wanted to call at the afternoon portion of that 3rd day, that's fine. You just don't want to call them the next day or the day after that if they've told you, it's going to be 5 days before you hear something, or you'll hear something after that, because then at that point, it's almost like you're hounding them. But if you're giving them that space, and they say 5 days and you call on day 5, that's fine. You just want to make sure it's probably after lunchtime when they've had an opportunity to make a decision, because I've seen this happen many times where a person calls and follows up, and they'll say, wow, we were just actually getting ready to call you, and they made the person an offer right on the phone. But you don't want to let too much time go by, so never let more than a day go by after that deadline, because at that point you might lose out on an opportunity.
Brilliant. What are some quick tips and tricks if you're being interviewed by a group?
Okay. Well, one major thing is always maintain contact with everyone that is on the panel, or everyone that is a representative of the company. A common mistake that happens is only focusing on the person asking the questions, and you want to make sure you're giving equal eye contact to everyone. So maintain that eye contact with everyone in the room that is part of that interview panel. Another thing is you always want to try and maintain good posture and body language, because when a person is interviewing you, the other folks, if they're not asking questions, they're observing. They're watching everything. Some individuals may actually just be taking notes while the other person's asking all the questions, or they may take turns asking questions. Another thing is stay consistent. If someone asks you a question and another person asks you the same thing, don't reinvent the wheel and try to come up with some magical, flavorful answer when you've already answered that. Try to stay consistent, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for consistency. So you can almost expect that they're going to ask the same question. They just may reword it or rephrase it a little bit. But they're looking for that consistency because they want to make sure that what you're saying is true.
All right, and last question. I could go on and on and on with questions because you are doing so amazing. What does it mean to have a callback or a second or third round interview, and how do you prepare differently for those second rounds or third rounds than you would your initial?
Oh, you guys are asking some awesome questions. I love it. This is where I live at. As far as the second interview is concerned, the second interview, the first and foremost, you can pat yourself on the back because that means that they have taken an interest in you and they are looking to move you forward in the process. So if it's a second interview, chances are you're going to now interview with either another member of management, or let's say if your first interview was with a recruiter, now you're going to actually interview with the hiring manager, the person who's the decision maker. Or if you interview with the hiring manager on the first interview, now you may actually interview with their boss or a peer, or maybe the training manager, or someone that you'll consistently be interacting with if you were hired for the job. So you can expect that you are probably going to have more in-depth questions on your skill sets and your experience. Maybe the first interview talked more about what some of your experience has been with your past roles or your past jobs, or what it is that you're looking to do. And now the second interview, you can almost expect that they're going to want specific examples. Tell me about a specific time when you faced conflict, with the peer, and what steps did you take to resolve it? You're going to have a lot more behavioral-based interview questions because this other person doesn't know you. And so they're looking for that consistency to see if they're going to get the same information that was given during the first interview. So again, consistency is going to be important. And then again, from there, they want to know that they want those specific examples. So they're going to ask you a lot of behavioral-based interview questions. There are some companies that will send individuals through 5 or 6 interviews. I've seen that happen. And again, what they're looking for, again, is consistency. They want to make sure that you're providing the same responses, or are you making this stuff up as you go along? And hiring managers are pretty, they're pretty sharp. They've heard enough interviews usually to know if someone's trying to fluff a response or fluff an answer. My suggestion would always be to try and remain consistent. If they ask a little bit more detail, try to provide them with with more detail, but don't give overkill. Try not to reinvent the wheel. Keep it simple, keep it direct, and then wait for the next question. Did I answer your question?
You absolutely did. Robert, I want to sincerely, on behalf of the Student Event Planners Association, thank you so much for being on this call today. You did such a phenomenal job. Honestly, I personally learned so much, and I know all of our listeners did as well. I couldn't be more excited, honestly. So everybody, definitely make sure you check out interviewwiz.com. Robert has included his information there, and The Truth About Interviewing. Be sure that you get that book, and we'll definitely make an announcement when your second book comes out, Robert. I know I'm going to buy it right now. I'm so excited to read it. Thank you so much for the time that you spent today. I'm just speechless. Do you have anything else you want to add before we wrap up this call?
Just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity, and again, I really appreciate the time. And again, if there's any questions, please, feel free to have anyone to email me. I know sometimes when you give it a couple of days, you think of something, and you're like, oh man, I wish I would have asked that question. So feel free to email or give me a call. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Robert, so much. And for all the SCPA members and non-SCPA members who tuned in for today's webinar, thank you guys so much. Do note that we're going to be having webinars every single month that are going to be free for you guys to join in for the professional development program. Robert was our very first speaker, and we are just so delighted to have had you, Robert. You are absolutely phenomenal. I can't give you enough praise. If you are participating in this webinar for the professional development program for SCPA, you can log into the member portal after this call to get the links to the video. They're also going to be posted on our YouTube channel as well. And just want to thank everybody, and especially you, Robert, for being here today. Everyone, have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Have a good evening.